All right, hello. What we're working on today is we're looking at how to do descriptive statistics inside of a spreadsheet. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this Google Sheets. Um, you can do this in Excel. You can do this in numbers. I'm going to do all my examples in Google Sheets. It would be easiest if you use Google Sheets. But if you don't, we will cross that bridge when we get to it. But we need functionally the same thing coming out. You will find that the commands between Google Sheets, numbers, and Excel are the same. So whatever's here will translate across. And so what you see here is we have a spreadsheet, or we have docs.google.com spreadsheets. If you go to sheets.google.com, it will take you to this. What we want to do is we want to start a new blank sheet. And we get this empty format coming through. Now, we will reference things by their cells. And spreadsheets talk about their cells in their column and then their row. So that one there is in column C, row 4. And so this is called C4. What I'm going to do is I'm going to enter data in. And this is the data we're going to use. Now, this data and data entry ends up being one of the more slower parts of spreadsheets. When I was out in the world, final exam and final grade, trying to earn a living before I finished college. One of the things I found, because I had taken typing in high school, was I could always get a job with data entry. And you'll find when you use data in the real world, one of the better things that can happen to you is that your data can come in a machine format, right? Like a lot of you right now are watching this come across the screen going like, can you just send us the spreadsheet? And what you'll want to do here is you'll want to enter in the data I have. So notice across the top, I'm putting my variable names for what my column data is going to be. And then going down, I'm going to have the entries. So notice that my data is going to be between rows 2 and 16. This will become important. And let me oops. Carol. Let's see. FM. F. Oops, that's what happened. There we go. There we go. Already, I'm having appreciation for my data coming back in a form that's usable. And we will get that as we come through. But let me get my data entered here. Good. And you're going to ask yourself, where can I get this data? I will have this spreadsheet posted after we enter it. But for better or for worse, we are now entering our data here. All right. So we'll enter our data. And through the magic of editing, my data is entered. And this is the data that you'll want to be entering in. Notice I've left the final grade column blank. And since column of final grade is blank. What we're going to want to do is we want to do some weighted averages. And we're going to be doing weighted averages here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm occasionally going to flip back and forth to some formulae and how we use formulae in spreadsheets. And so let me I lost my mouse for a second. You guys, there's just the video requirements are causing everything to bouncy. But that's good, right? That means we're getting a lot of data out if the computer's chugging with it. Or I need to upgrade my computer. All right, so a weighted average was, and I'll just put W for weighted, was the sum of the weight times the x value divided by the sum of the weights. And what we want to do is we want to weight our final grade. And so what we're going to do is exam 1 is 30% of the grade. Exam 2 is 30% of the grade. Final exam is 40%. And so what we can do is we can add up the weights. Now I'm going to add up the percentages as decimals. So 0.3 times exam 1 plus 0.3 times exam 2 plus 0.4 times the final grade. And I want to divide by the sum of all these. Well, 0.3 plus 0.3 plus 0.4 is 1. And so anything divided by 1 is itself. And you'll find a lot of times when you're doing weighted averages of grades, that if you use the decimal versions and everything adds up to 100, you don't need to, this thing becomes divide by 1. Right? And so that's common with weighted exam averages or weighted scores. So what we want to do is we want to turn this into an Excel formula. And so Excel references everything by its cells. So I'm going to do 0.3 times, and times is shift 8, the cell that exam 1 is in. So if I look over here, let's go back here. The cell that exam 1 is in is F2. So I'm only going to focus on this first row. I'm only going to do Beasley's grades. And what I need to write out here is I'm going to do 0.3 times F2. That's the cell exam 1 is in, plus 0.3 times G2 plus 0.4 times H2. And that's what I'm going to type in. And we'll come over here and we'll look at that. So to do that, I come into the final grade. And again, I'm only focusing on Beasley. So I hit the equal sign, and it's going to show me a formula up here. I'm still going to type here, but it's going to show it up here in the left also. So I'm going to do 0.3 shift 8 for times. Shift 8 for times. And then an F2. And F2 is the cell. Notice it highlights the cell for me that I've done. So I can make sure I'm getting the right one. Plus 0.3 shift 8, which is times G2. And there it's highlighted exam 2 for me. Plus 0.4 times H2. And it's highlighted that. And so when I'm done, I'm going to hit tab. And it throws me over and I get the final grade for Beasley. I'm going to click back on this so you can see that our formula is here. 0.3 times F2 plus 0.3 times G2 plus 0.4 times H2. And it has automatically calculated the average for that. Well, before I go down and repeat this to everyone, Excel does this nice thing. These cells are variables and I can change it. So if I copy this down one cell, and I'm going to do this by dragging down, and I'll just click on this one here, it's automatically updated the formula to move down 5. And so if I set things up referencing the cells properly, I only have to do one correct formula, and I'll drag down, and now I have the final grades for everyone. Okay, well, there are some things we like to know. So I'm going to start on 18 here, and I want to label some things I need to know. I want to know the mean, the median, and the mode. The mean, the median, and the mode. So mean, median, and mode are values we want to calculate, and we're going to want to calculate them for any quantitative variable I have. Now, for most of this, I'm going to use exam 1 as the data that I am going to use. And notice exam 1 is F2 to F16. But for mean, median, and mode, I'm going to do it for all of the quantitative data. So I'm going to start here with age. And so the formula we use is equal and the word median, or not median, the word average for mean. And my first piece of data is on C2. So I type in C2 and I use the colon, and then I point it to my last piece of data, which is on C16. And notice how it highlights C2 to C16. I put my parentheses to close it out. So I have equal average, parenthesis, C2 to C16. I want to make this a little bit bigger for us here. For now, I'm just going to make it so only the data is on the screen. We're going to use the other space later. And so that's what I typed in, equal average, C2 to C16 in parentheses. Now what's nice is I can highlight this and go to edit and copy. And then I can paste it here. And notice what it did. It changed this to equal average F2 F16. Because I copied and I didn't do anything special to my variables, it recognized I moved over 2 or 3 columns and kept the same row. And so it did the same thing for all the variables. It moved over 3 columns. And now, since I have all numbers here, I can just drag this across. We're going to have to eventually find a way that it doesn't do this auto update for us, but for right now, that helps us. And here I have my mean value for each of my scores. My exam 1, my exam 2, my final, and my final grade. And we can tidy this up if we want. We can come to format, number, and we can, let's see, what do we want to do here? We want to give it custom number format, I think will be nice here. And I want to give it, let's give it 2 decimal places. Okay. And so format, number, 2 decimal places. Now that I've done that custom format, it'll give me 2 decimal places everywhere I go. So number, format, number. And so for right now, we're using 2 decimal places. All right, so the median is the number in the middle. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to go equal, and this is median. Type in the word median. Notice it's telling me, hey, we have this function called median. It will try to auto-correct you into doing weird things every now and again, but it's nice to see the list of functions periodically. And again, I was at C2 to C16. Notice I'm saying 2 in place of my colon. And so I type in median parenthesis C2 colon C16. Let me type that in properly. And notice how the box shows me the data it's picking. Copy that. And I'm going to paste it here. And so you go to edit, copy, and edit paste, or Control C and Control V. And then I'm going to drag that across. And I have my median values. I'm going to give a little more space here, make it small. And we're going to look at the mode. The mode could possibly have multiple values. In fact, I know I've been working with this data enough. This repeats 72 and it repeats 89. So there's 2 modes there. This one, I think, is multimodal. And so we're going to actually ask it to create the modes. We're going to type in mode.mult. And this will find multiple modes. Again, C2 colon C16. When I hit tab, 19 appears the most. Again, I'm going to Control C to copy that. And I'm going to Control V here. And notice what happens here. It spits out 2 answers, one in the space I wanted and one below, because there were multiple modes. And if I copy that across, I get all of my multiple modes. Notice there is no mode. There's no repeated value in the final grade. And so that's blank. For the final exam, 90 was repeated. And for, wait a minute, or 73 and 90 was repeated, my bad. And for the exam 2, 73, 92, and 95 was repeated. So 81.7 was repeated in the final grade. So there we have mean, median, and mode. So we have some numbers and some ideas of the numbers. All right, and I'm going to come down here to 24, and I'm going to write standard deviation. I want to measure the standard deviation. Now, for the sake of this, I'm going to consider this to be a population. Remember, we have two formulae for standard deviation, and we have one for the population and one for a sample. For right now, we're going to treat this as a population. When we need to do sample standard deviations, we'll take that into place. So I'm going to put in my equal sign, and I want to type in STDEVP. And notice it's saying that's standard deviation for the entire population. Again, C2 to C16. And it's highlighted my data. And my standard deviation is a 1.3. There's a small spread in the ages. I'll come back and copy and paste that. Oops. Copy this, Control C, and then Control V. And I have my standard deviation for my exam 1, and I'll take that blue square and I'll drag it across, and that'll copy it into each of these. And now I have my standard deviation for each piece of data. Again, I'm going to go to Format and Number, and we're going to do 2 decimal places. I think 2 decimal places is nice for what we're doing. It's not really a necessity to do 2 decimal places or a standard, but I think for the level that we're viewing these things and the type of numbers that we're using, this isn't a bad way. So I click on each one, Format, Number, and then come down to the custom format I made of 2 decimal places, which just shows me an example of right down here. Yeah, and so we've tidied up our data a little bit. All right, and so at this point, the spreadsheet isn't giving us anything that we couldn't get from the calculator. But here's the first thing where this is actually going to start saving us some time. So I'm going to click on column F, and I'm going to insert a column to the right. And I'm going to put my exam 1 Z-scores. And Z-scores on the calculator were hard. We had to do some extra work to get them. So let's look at and review our formula for Z-scores. So each Z-score corresponded to a piece of data. And it was the value for that piece of data minus the mean divided by the standard deviation. And so there is a unique score for each piece of data, and it talks about the value of that piece of data relative to the mean. In fact, it's a way of measuring, right? If this is my mean, it's my distance to my piece of data in units of standard deviation. Right? And to be honest, from a numerical sense, it's a unitless thing, but I am counting how many standard deviations away from my mean my individual data set is, or my individual piece of data. Okay, let me get back to my pencil here. My pencil tip changed. There we go. So we need to make that formula happen, and we need to do it in a way that will update for each of our spreadsheet. That happened. It did not switch over to the Blackboard, did it? Let me go here. Let's go back here. I'll go back here. And then I'll come back here. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to pause a little bit here. And I'm going to upload this as the part 1, and we'll look at building Z-scores when we get back. So what we want to do is we want to make these Z-scores. And so to do that, let's look at our formula for Z-score again. So I'm going to come here, and our Z-score for any piece of data, so I'm going to put a little I on it, is that piece of data minus the mean divided by the standard deviation. And this tells us, that's my mean, how far my piece of data is from the mean in multiples of standard deviation, right? So I'm like 1.4 standard deviations away, or 0.8 on the positive side. And it also tells me if I'm on the negative side. So what we want to do is we want to do that inside our spreadsheet. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to create that formula. But notice our standard deviation and our mean for exam 1 here, F18 and F24, don't move, right? Our individual pieces of data move. And when I copied it, updated things to move. So I'm going to need a way to anchor the mean and the standard deviation. So my formula was my piece of data, and so my piece of data is in cell F2, minus my mean, which is in F18, but I need to anchor it, and the anchor in Excel and Sheets is the $sign. And so I'm going to anchor the column, and I'm going to anchor the row. And so F2 minus $F $18. I put that in parentheses, and that's the upstairs of my Z-score formula. The other part of the formula is I divide all of that. So I put parentheses, so I do that subtraction, and then I divide with the backslash all of that, and I'm going to want to do the standard deviation. Again, I need to anchor that. So I use the $sign to lock in the F, and the $sign to lock in the 24. And my Z-score for the first piece of data, Beasley, is negative 1.8. So there are 1.8 standard deviations behind the mean score. But now I can drag it down, and I'm going to just select one of these. I'll do the 1.51. And notice how the $signs lock the value. So I'm always grabbing the mean from here and the standard deviation from here. But my piece of data changes. And so I get the Z-score for all of my pieces of data. And I want to highlight all of these, and I'm going to go to Format and Number, and we're going to give it 2 decimal places also. And so there are my Z-scores. And so now that on our calculator was hard, because we had to do each one by hand when we went and did these. And so here are our spreadsheets starting to pay off. Also realize this is 15 pieces of data. It's not too bad to do by hand. But real world data, we're doing 100, right? Alone with me, my working just with this class, I have 3 sections of 20, so my data is 60 or 70. A little more than 70. When you add up all the different parts to it. And so when I want to look at the average across all my statistics class on an exam, or I want to look at the Z-scores or whatnot, I've got to use this technology to help me. It doesn't change the meaning of everything. So we'll use the technology to help us, but then what does these Z-scores mean? Well, it means, Bruce was not quite a full standard deviation ahead of the mean score, while May was a standard deviation and a half ahead. In fact, in general, there were no unusual scores because I had nothing greater than 2. And so the meanings stay. The technology just lets us look at a larger group of these more quickly. All right, so we've created our Z-scores, and you're going to repeat this for the other pieces of data as part of the homework assignment. But what I want to do now is I want to create a frequency distribution. So I'm going to move some stuff around. Well, I'm not going to move any of the data, but I'm going to move what we're looking at. So I'm going to come down here, and I'm just going to label this stuff exam 1. And I'm going to put everything about exam 1 down below it here. And so exam 1, things I'm going to need to make a frequency distribution are the min, the max, the range, and the number of classes. All that's going to go together to help me create the class width. This is probably the hardest part of this. It's a little chaotic in its setup. And the function that it uses is works really nicely with some caveats. But what I want to highlight for you here is we're only doing 15 things. And so 15 things doing the frequency distribution, you had to go out and you had to make your little tally marks, and you kept doing the tally marks together. And that was a pain. What we're going to do right now is a pain. But imagine doing 100 pieces of data where you had to do tally marks. That's much more of a pain. What I'm going to do here is I think my mins and maxes will go here. So over here, I'm going to put my lower class bounds and my upper class bounds. And then I'm going to put my frequency there. So my min is really nice. There's a nice function for min. So I'm going to go equal min, and that's going to be min. And I'm going to want to tell it the data I'm looking at. So it's F2 to F16. Notice up above here, it's highlighting the data I selected. And it gives me my min value. Max, I hit the equal sign, max, parenthesis, F2 to F16. I'm repeating that, but it's a repetition, that's good. Again, the box is highlighting the data, and my max is 99. My range I don't have a function for, so I'm going to subtract the max. I'm going to subtract the min from the max. And so my min value, or I'm sorry, my max value is in F28. I'm going to do F28 minus F27. And that gives me my range. Now, the number of classes is something we're going to specify. And for right now, I'm going to say we're going to use 5 classes. I'm just going to enter 5 for right now. I type in 5. And the formula we had for class width, let me go back here to the blackboard, is we had the range divided by the number of classes. And whatever this number is, we round it up. We always round it up. So I'm going to want to do that in my spreadsheet. And we have this wonderfully named function. I'm going to put equal sign. All right, and you're going to notice you can see what I'm typing here or here. RUNDUP, round up. And I'm going to do my range, which is what cell is my range in. It's in F29, F29, divided by my number of classes, which is in F30. And there's my class width. And yes, we could type in the numbers that we got back when we did these equations, but if we reference things to cells, if I update any of the information, everything else updates. All right, so here's the hard part of this. We have to build our lower class boundaries exactly like we built them. There is nothing that's going to build them automatically for us. So when we did this in the book, we started with the first class, and we said, hey, you're going to equal my minimum value. And so my min value is F, whoops, scrolling here. Get back to this here. Nope. There we go. So my min value is an F27. And so this first one, we have to do F27. It's the only thing we can do. But then we added the class value. or the class width, sorry, the class width. And so I want to add to this thing here, F27, I want to add the class width. Now, I'm going to want this part to move, so notice there's no anchors. But the class width is right here and always here, so I'm going to need to anchor that with $F, well, it's in row 31. And now I can drag it down until I have 5 of them. Whoops, what did I do? Did I hit something weird here? $31, F27. Huh, I mistyped something, did I? Oh, that shouldn't be F27. Notice what I did there. That's good. Some mistakes help us learn what we did, right? I want to add to this. This is an H27. So I want to do equal H27 plus my class width, which is $F, $31. And now if I drag this down, I get my lower class bounds. Sometimes mistakes are good. They can show us what to do. Notice how the cell values are important. I need to be referring to the cell values, so when I drag, I get the boundaries that I want. And each one of these is 9 more than the previous one. Now, when we then went and had to create our upper class boundaries, we noticed that this upper class boundary was less than the one coming next. And this one was less than this, and so on. So I just need to say this is equal to H28 minus 1. And if I drag that down to all but the last one, I get my upper class boundaries. And then in the last one is this 91 plus the class width. And so 91 is in I30 plus my class width, which is $F, $31. And now I have my upper and lower class boundaries. The real key is notice that we can use a formula to create all of them but the first one and the last one. We have to do something specific with the first and last one. And when we did them by hand, we actually did that. Well, we're going to choose the minimum, and then we're going to choose all the upper bounds. And then we're going to choose the 1 minus on the next column and then move across. Well, what's nice with this is this has a command called frequency, and it has 2 parts. So I'm going to type in my command equal frequency. And I'm going to tell it my data is F2 to F16. And now I'm going to need to tell it the upper class bounds, because it's going to compare everything in the data to the upper class bounds. And so I27 starts my upper class bound, and I31 ends it. So in here I'll say I27, I need to put a comma between the two, I27 colon I31. So notice frequency, point to it here if I can, F2 colon F16, that's my data, comma, I27 colon I31, those are my upper class bounds. And there it gives me my frequency distribution. Notice it gives me a 0. It compares my data. It says, are you less than 64? Yes, there's 2 of you. Are you less than 73? 4. Are you less than 82? 3. Are you less than 91? 4. Are you less than 100? 2. It checks to see if you had anything left over. If we create these right, we shouldn't, because that's why we round it up to make sure our upper bin always carried through. And so we have our frequency distribution table. The last thing I need to do is I need to make a histogram. So I'm going to come all the way up top, and I'm going to grab F2. I'm going to click on F2. I'm going to let go of my mouse, and I'm going to hold the Shift key. And I'm going to click on F16, and it highlights F2 to F16. And I'm going to insert, chart, And it's going to suggest to me a column chart. Well, I don't want a column chart. I want a histogram. Now, these suggested ones changed based on your usage, so you might not have histogram there. If you scroll down to other, in the middle of other is histogram, and there's our histogram for our data. And I'm going to drag this by holding my mouse button down, and I'm going to bring it down to the bottom. And we have just made a histogram of exam 1, a frequency distribution of exam 1. I have my mean, my median, and my mode, and I have my Z-scores. Your homework's going to be doing this for exam 2, the final exam, and the final grade. And so you'll put together a whole spreadsheet like this. What you're going to need to do is you can click on where it says Untitled up here, and you're going to call it WB1 for Workbook 1. You're going to put in your last name, and then your section, D, D2, W, 1PG, whatever your section is. So I can sort these out. Thank you.